So for whatever reason, you found yourself in an argument against feminism.
Oh, it's only one reason. There's only one reason that people actually oppose feminism, at least in the West. And that's because feminism is trying to infringe upon their rights.
You sure about that, Sargon? I challenge you, or any of your audience, to name a male right that was specifically taken away by feminism, and not by traditionalists. As you can see, right off the bat, Sargon of Akkad has set up his conclusion, and will be building his entire argument upon that. This is what's known as confirmation bias. Sargon is an anti-feminist. And anti-feminists believe that type of angry, hateful feminism, represented by the tiniest vocal minority, represents all feminists. And as a result, he views feminism through that lens. And his viewers are seeing this video through that lens. Only a few seconds in, and she was already interrupted, thus removing any original context.
But here's the thing, your argument sucks.
Honestly, I'm genuinely impressed with your balls.
There's quite a lot of feminists willing to take on anti-feminist talking points. Count me in as one of them.
Let's start with the most basic shutdown against feminism. Feminism is sexist. You've come to this conclusion because you've been taught that sexism is basically the prejudice, stereotyping, and discrimination on the basis of sex. Right.
Because that is the standard English definition of the word sexism, and you just agreed to it.
One clever bait-and-switch bit of doublespeak that Sargon pulls here that many anti-feminists do is conflating the sociological definition of words with the common definition of words. A simple way to differentiate the two is to think of sexism, racism, or any kind of systematic oppression as being institutionalized, and the common definition as referring to individual instances. For example, the statement, "all men are pigs," may be sexist from the standpoint of an individual stating a prejudicial statement about men, but it does not change the socio-economic status of men or women. Women still earn less than men regardless of how certain individuals may feel about men.
Before I even get into this, I just want to state that it's impossible for the oppressor to be the oppressed.
Ooh, that's embarrassing. That's cringy, actually. I'm so sorry. I'm sure that you are terribly, terribly oppressed. But I mean, maybe if you'd done your research, you'd know what a kyriarchy is, and you'd know that actually the oppressor can also be the oppressed in different ways, because, and I hate to introduce you to this term, it's called intersectional feminism. That feeling when an anti-feminist on the internet is a better feminist than you. It's embarrassing, isn't it?
Sargon once again pulls a clever bit of sleight of hand that first-time viewers may miss, and much of his audience fails to notice this because they're impressed by his use of kyriarchy. What Fawn is saying is that it's impossible for the oppressor to be the oppressed in that specific relationship. For example, an African-American male still has male privilege, while a white female still has white privilege. The privileges do not cancel each other out, nor are they linear in their measurement. The African-American male is oppressed in terms of race, but privileged in terms of gender.
That's the nature of oppression.
Far be it from me to question the credentials of a first-world feminist when she purports to tell me about the nature of oppression, but are you sure you know what you're talking about?
It wouldn't be a Sargon of Akkad video without some comparison of progressivism to Marxism.
Being offended by something is not the same as being oppressed by something.
Wait, that's my rebuttal to you! I mean, I know I made a few assumptions just a minute ago, but I assumed that you were saying that you were oppressed. And I was going to say, well look, just because you're offended by something doesn't mean you're being oppressed by something.
Fawn was pointing out that oppression is much more complex than what anti-feminists make it out to be. But unfortunately, you brought it back to that misunderstanding. There's this idea of feminism that defines oppression as pink earplugs or a joke you don't like. At the same time, this is pointing out that white men being offended by being called racist or sexist is not a sign of discrimination. The fact is that systems of oppression run much deeper than the things on the surface that many see. The small surface things that are a symptom of a larger issue.
So bearing that in mind, quite simply, sexism is a form of oppression.
Okay, let's just go over your logic here so far. Sexism is prejudice, stereotyping, or discrimination on the basis of sex. It's impossible for the oppressor to be the oppressed. Just because you're offended doesn't mean you're oppressed. Bearing that in mind, sexism is a form of oppression. And since we're talking about oppression so much, a common English definition of that is prolonged, cruel, or unjust treatment or exercise of authority. Now, I'm laying this out because I really want to expose to you the mind of a feminist. It's so full of shit. And not because she's wrong. Because she's actually not, right? The problem is that most of this is totally unconnected gobbledygook. I agree on her standard English definition of sexism, and therefore I'm happy to use the standard English definition of oppression, as I'm sure she must be using that as well. So, when she says sexism is prejudice, stereotyping, discrimination on the basis of sex, and sexism is a form of oppression, oppression being prolonged, cruel, or unjust treatment or exercise of authority, being exposed to sexism for a prolonged period of time is indeed oppression. Since we agree on that, I'll remove those, and just concentrate on the filler. So, it's impossible for the oppressor to be the oppressed, and just because you're offended doesn't mean you're oppressed. Obviously, leaving feminist logic aside, I'm happy to agree that, yes, under pretty much every circumstance you can think of, the oppressor is not also the oppressed, or at least is not the person or class that they are oppressing. And they are, of course, absolutely correct. Just because you're offended doesn't mean that you are oppressed. So what does this filler have to do with the first and last sentences that she uttered? If you were to separate them into different statements, they would still make sense. Neither one is contingent on the other. The reason she has put, it's impossible for the oppressor to be the oppressed, just because you're offended doesn't mean you're oppressed, in between her definition of sexism and her assertion that sexism is a form of oppression, again, both of which are correct statements, is because she is apparently setting up a logical fallacy called begging the question, which is going to be her assuming her own point, that men are not oppressed and are therefore the oppressors.
Notice how Sargon does an in-depth analysis of our opening disclaimer as individual arguments separate from one another, or even contradictory, which he incorrectly defines as begging the question. We must also bear in mind that this was not meant to be an example of the most rigorous form of academic feminism, but rather a vlog in which she explains the problems with anti-feminism in plain everyday language, which may not be organized in the most nitpick-proof manner, but for the target audience, it is more effective than a dry lecture would be. On the other hand, this is a video explaining through logic and reasoning the problems with anti-feminist lines of reasoning, so my earlier statement should not be confused as conflating Fawn's video with pop feminism. Using Sargon's methodology, it's possible to refute the idea that the sky is blue. Let's take the statements, the sky in the daytime is blue. Clouds appear white or gray. When the sun sets, the sky is red at the horizon. White clouds turn bright pink at dusk. When you take and separate the statements, they may appear contradictory or at least logically inconsistent, but when spoken together, they make sense. This is why it's important to not chop up an argument and interrupt after every syllable. It's much like how pieces of a jigsaw puzzle by themselves don't show you anything meaningful. You have to put the pieces together.
I am not saying that men don't face negative stereotyping, and I am not saying that men don't face prejudice and oppression in society.
She, of course, uses negative statements there for a very good reason. Again, it's part of the doublethink. But as she said, she's not refuting that men face negative stereotyping, prejudice and oppression, and that this is being done by society. So as she has laid it out, yes, men are negatively stereotyped, which is a form of prejudice, and prejudice over a long period of time is a form of oppression, and it's being done by society, so it must be prolonged, because it is within society that men are born, live and die. So thank you should be what every MRA should say to this young lady. She has just given you a logically sound and feminist argument as to why men are actually oppressed.
I refer you to my previous statements about the jigsaw puzzle. This sentence was cut in two halfway through. This is similar to what Thunderfoot did to Anita Sarkeesian's "everything is sexist, everything is racist, everything is homophobic, and you have to point it all out" line, which has been completely removed from its context.
Oh, and don't forget
That it's impossible for the oppressor to be the oppressed.
and therefore men cannot possibly be oppressing women. So I wonder what doublethink she's going to use to dig herself out of this pit.
Sargon has created the false narrative that the idea of men facing problems due to patriarchy is the same as men being an oppressed class. Much of the problems men face that anti-feminists attribute to misandry is actually misogyny. Men demean men who partake in anything that doesn't fit the rigid societal masculine archetype, because it's seen as making him less of a man. Therefore, femininity and women, or being like women, is seen as lesser. Meanwhile, a woman who steps out of society's ideas of femininity is said by some men to be trying to become a man. The dichotomy of being like a man as perceived as a higher status than being like a woman, hurts both men and women, but is rooted in misogyny.
However, only oppressed people experience all of that, as well as it being institutionalized and systemic.
So she digs deeper with the tautology. The sort of social oppression we are talking about is, of course, institutionalized and systemic within society. And she'd already established men as being oppressed, so it's not like men don't have all of this apply to them as well. But the thing is, I think the term oppressed people here, I think this is her presupposing that women and minorities, LGBT people, are oppressed, and therefore she's referring to them as oppressed people. And if we do change the word simply to women, which is probably what she's thinking of, let's be honest, that's not a tautology in her head anymore. That's not wrong. Only women experience all of what men experience, as well as being institutionally and systemically oppressed. So she hasn't actually made an argument. She's actually turned around and said, yeah, well, women have it worse.
Actually, she's expounding on one of her opening points that also served as a disclaimer. Have you never given a presentation?
But men can get raped too. I can't stand this argument. You have to be a certain level of horrible to pit victims against each other, whatever gender.
What a fucking bizarre thing to say. Nobody is pitting victims against each other, you sociopath. The reason that saying, yeah, but men can get raped too, is an argument against feminism, is because you are specifically excluding them from your activism. And therefore you can perceive someone else mentioning a separate group of victims that you have no interest in talking about as a challenge against feminism. If feminism was actually trying to help male victims of rape, people wouldn't be able to offer male victims of rape as an argument against feminism.
The people who jump in with, but men get raped too, are not genuinely trying to bring awareness to male rape victims, but to derail conversation about women being raped. However, Sargon then goes on to state that feminism has done nothing for male rape victims. This is false. It was feminists who lobbied for male rape victims to be included in FBI statistics. I know that some will shift the goalpost and point out that forced to penetrate is not listed in the statistics. Feminists are working to change that, and have forced to penetrate included. Here are some articles on everyday feminism that discuss male rape victims. It should be pointed out that it's dude bros who say that a guy who was taken advantage of is lucky, not women or feminists.
Also, I find that people use this argument a lot when discussing rape culture, and actually they don't quite know what the discussion is about.
Irrelevant. The question is, what about male victims of rape? You are interested in talking about rape culture because it is a feminist myth that you can build a narrative upon.
When the questions are asked during discussions of women being raped, it's derailing the conversation. Her point is that pitting victims of rape against each other does not help men. Notice also how Sargon, like most other anti-feminists, while pointing out male rape victims and claiming that feminism hasn't done enough to help male rape victims, has offered nothing himself that would help male rape victims. Instead, he chooses to tweet out, "I wouldn't even rape you," to Jess Phillips, who herself is a sexual assault survivor. This behavior was defended by anti-feminists. It casts doubt on the idea that anti-feminists take rape seriously when this sort of juvenile trolling and egging on his many followers to do the same thing is the norm. The acceptance of this behavior is an example of what feminists mean by rape culture, which anti-feminists like Sargon deny exist.
I want to handle this the right way because feminism supports all victims of rape. But in the context of why your argument sucks, we are fully aware that men get raped too. We are not ignorant. What we were actually discussing was rape culture, so not the act itself. Rape culture is when you ask victims what they were wearing. Were they flirting beforehand? Asking if they possibly had too much to drink. Whilst anyone can get raped, rape culture predominantly affects women. Men do not get asked if they were showing too much skin. Rape culture is currently ingrained in society. There are people that would never rape anybody, but sometimes their actions and sometimes their words might contribute towards rape culture.
Well, this is pretty cut and dry. The argument against feminism is that men get raped too, and instead of helping to address the instances where men get raped, you instead want to talk about not actual rapes, because, like you say, feminism supports all victims of rape, and we know that men can get raped, but what we're actually doing is discussing rape culture. Because I'm the one who changed the topic of discussion. You said men can get raped too, and I said, yeah, well, that's true, but let's talk about rape culture because that affects predominantly women. Therefore, we don't have to talk about men getting raped. Basically, this boils down to exactly what you said in the previous argument. Yes, I know that what you've said is valid, but women have it worse.
Once again, Sargon paints a false narrative. What was actually said was that playing a misery measuring game between rape victims does not help matters, and talking about who gets raped more does not address the underlying issue of rape culture. Notice how Sargon puts words in our mouth about ignoring male victims, which serves the purpose of riling up his audience. By making claims about the feminist stance on men's issues, based on nothing but conjecture, the anti-fem riles up their audience of mostly angry white teenage boys by planting ideas about the feminist in question. They do not watch the original video, and put their full trust in the content creator who is telling them what they want to hear. Many such as Undoomed or Bearing are more direct about this, while some like Sargon and Thunderfoot are a bit more subtle, hiding behind uncommon vocabulary words and pedantry to impress their audience.
Here's how your argument wouldn't suck. Every single rape prevention tip is geared towards people being in charge of not getting raped, not teaching rapists not to rape. So there's the big problem.
It's amazing they make this argument with a fucking straight face. You are not in control of what other people do, however, you are in control of what you do. And if we know that there are actually risk mitigating actions that one can take to lower the chances that a rape will occur, why not take them? I mean, you have to understand that we can't control what someone who is intent on raping someone is going to do. All we can do is give the potential victim the tools they can use to prevent themselves from being raped, because prevention is better than a fucking cure. Unless, of course, you're talking about Muslim migrants from Syria and North Africa who don't realise that what they might be doing is actually rape because they don't have the same laws and standards for rape in their countries. But since I don't think you're talking about that, you sound fucking stupid.
Sargon identifies himself as a status quo warrior once again, by highlighting the fact that he doesn't see a need to improve consent education in the West, while introducing the red herring of the Middle East. Another common anti-feminist favorite talking point. Fawn lives in the West, so she's addressing rape culture in the West. Feminists in the Middle East are more familiar with the Middle East, which is why their primary focus is there, and Western feminists' primary focus is in the West.
The other problem in that is that most of these tips are aimed at women. With colour-changing nail varnish, for example. There needs to be more done to prevent rape for everybody, such as those glasses that change colour when they detect a substance. That way everyone can be safe.
This isn't a point I object to, but I really don't think that it invalidates the idea of using nail polish to also do the detection if you want. I mean, you might go somewhere where they don't use these glasses and you still have this kind of protection.
Fawn's point wasn't an objection to nail polish itself, but highlighted the fact that most users of nail polish are women. What was that about her not caring about male victims again? Before you jump the gun, I did not say men don't use nail polish. I said that in our culture, nail polish is marketed towards and primarily used by women. In an ideal world, such a stigma would not exist against men painting their nails. But the reality is, in our culture, it would do little to help men.
Well, that's just my opinion. Before any argument, you're going to have to show that you know what you're talking about before your opinion is valid.
How interesting. Are you going to tell me anything about the internal consistency of the logic used in said argument? Just out of interest.
I can tell you that I think socks have emotions. That's just my opinion. It doesn't make it true. Most of the time this has been used because you said your piece, somebody else has come back with personal experience or references, or anything really, and because your argument doesn't extend past that's that, then you swiftly state that that is your made up opinion. Instead of saying that's just your opinion, try saying, I thought of this, but I'm not going to do any research on this, because I feel like I am right.
Yes, that is a very, very good description of how a feminist argues. There's a lot of projection going on here.
Please do your research, because without it, no one has a leg to stand on.
Yeah, kind of like your laughable Marxist analysis of the kyriarchy, am I right?
Sargon merely gave 3 empty replies that, when combined, amount to, I know you are, but what am I? And once again, Sargon mentions Marxism. He really has nothing to say at this point, but sadly, he doesn't have to, because his audience is sufficiently riled up.
I am so sick hearing about feminism. Shocker, so are we! Please help us not have to talk about this all the time.
You're wearing a t-shirt that says feminism is the radical notion that women are people. You fucking love talking about feminism.
What she means is that in an ideal world, feminism would no longer be needed. The best way to solve a problem is to work at it, not ignore it.
Well, I'm a woman and I don't find that offensive. This is quite a hefty topic about internalized misogyny.
Okay, I cut out loads of laughter. Yeah, it's not that women can't just not be offended by something. It's that they actually must secretly hate themselves.
And that is a whole other video. Your argument sucks because you do not speak on behalf of all women.
I love her expression here. It honestly looks like she's having a moment of self-awareness where she's like, hang on a second. Am I talking for all women? Did I just tell a woman that she hated herself because she wasn't offended? But anyway, yes, Pumpkin, she doesn't speak for all women. In fact, that is why she said, but I am not offended. Because you have obviously spoken for all women, and she is making the exception of herself to show that you don't speak for all fucking women.
The original statement was chopped in half, which allowed Sargon to insert his bias. Fawn never claimed to speak for all women. Hell, her literal next sentence is, neither do I. But her point was that anti-feminist women should stop acting as if they speak for all women. Sargon also misunderstands the term internalized misogyny, whether deliberately or not. The basic idea is that we internalize all things seen around us in our culture, whether or not we realize it. Internalized misogyny does not equal self-hate. In fact, there are several prominent conservative women who simultaneously have a high opinion of themselves as individuals, while demonstrating hatred of women.
Neither do I. Neither does anybody. Except maybe Beyonce. When you say this, you're choosing to ignore the negative ramifications that this particular thing might have on other women.
And here comes the Marxism. You've already demonstrated that you think women are a social class, and that's where this objection comes from. There is no sisterhood. Women do not owe you or any other women anything. If they want to act in a way that is within the bounds of the law, they are completely free to do so.
Marxism again? Come on, Sargon. The idea behind feminism is not only to allow women to be free to do as they please within the bounds of the law, but to remove double standard stigmas.
I can't tell you how to feel about things, that's up to you, but...
Oh no, you're going to sit here and tell them that they hate themselves, that they've got no right to independent action that isn't sanctioned by the Church of Feminism. You're going to tell them that what they do is harmful to others even if it's not harmful to others, and you're going to sit there and tell them that everything that they say is irrelevant because you want to talk about something that's slightly different. But you're not going to tell them how to feel because that would be going too far.
The statement was cut off before she said, "Don't throw everyone else under the bus in the process," so that Sargon could insert his creationist as feminism is a religion rant. As I've said in previous videos, it's not much different from saying atheism is religion.
Don't throw everyone else under the bus in the process.
Before we go any further, I just want to give you guys a heads up that the next point that Sargon makes that I'm about to refute is going to be a bit rambly. So I recommend strapping yourselves in and bracing yourselves, as this is going to be a long one.
Yeah, but what about men's rights? Men already have all the rights.
Neither you nor any other feminist can name a right that men have that women do not. We have all the same rights, you annoying bint. What I love about this little princess's position as well is that she really hasn't thought this through. She's thought, okay, I get to vote. I have the right to vote. Do men have the right to vote? And in America, they don't. Unless they register for the draft, which is something that the military want women to do now, which to their credit is something feminists want, but it's wildly unpopular with women.
The rights go far beyond just fundamental legal rights. However, if you want to go there,
neither you nor any other feminist can name a right that men have that women do not.
Challenge accepted. Feminism has gained women those legal rights, which are now under attack by anti-choice legislation in the US. Also, in many areas, female toplessness is illegal. Sources provided below regarding female bodily autonomy under attack. One or two rights may not sound like a lot, but they can have a large ripple effect that affects substantive rights in other spheres of life. For example, allowing same-sex couples to marry has allowed other inequalities to be addressed as a result of remedying that one legal disparity. The name one right is a common gotcha question used by anti-feminists, much like creationists, with the complexity of the I. To expand on my previous point, in the States, there is the Hobby Lobby decision. Women can be fired from Christian employers for getting pregnant out of wedlock, but men aren't fired in the same way. Birth control was not covered by insurance, but Viagra was until Obamacare. But who knows now? Some studies show that only 7 states in the United States guarantee that women's birth control prescriptions will be filled. When a woman walks into a pharmacy with a birth control prescription from her doctor, she should walk out with the medication without intimidation, delay, or harassment, the organization states. Across the country, federal and state bans and restrictions on abortion are commonplace. Fake clinics run by people who are anti-abortion are also rife in the US. In Latin America and the Caribbean, of the 4.3 million abortions performed in the region in 2008, 95% were unsafe. In 7 of the 34 countries, abortion is not permitted, and in 8 others, it's allowed only to save a woman's life. Oh, and here's another fun one. In some states, the rapist can sue for joint custody if their victim becomes pregnant. Notice how the rapist has to be convicted to be blocked from suing for custody. So, in all the cases that never go to trial or don't have enough evidence, loopholes in the system allow rapists to go free. Let's not forget about the government requirement to have a medically unnecessary procedure in order to get access to illegal abortion, or trap bills that just shut down access to abortions altogether. There is also a state-by-state list that shows women are forced to receive scientifically wrong information to obtain an abortion. To put the final nail in the coffin, states like Indiana and Texas are requiring women who have an abortion or miscarriage to pay for a funeral. Based on the information I provided, remind me again, Sargon, of how men still have it worse than women, in spite of the evidence I provided. You know, evidence? That very thing anti-feminists claim to pride themselves on? As for the men in the military point, the ultimate goal of second-wave feminism was the Equal Rights Amendment, and it was people against feminism opposed to it. The reason women have been kept out of the military is the idea that they're too dainty and frail to handle it. It was men who came up with the idea of things that are physically demanding being men's work, and more creative things being women's work. Feminism from the second wave on has opposed these rigid gender roles.
I think people use this argument a lot because it's hard to see just how something affects your life until you don't have it. I'm middle class and white. I come from extreme privilege, and if it wasn't for people talking about it, I never would have thought about it. Because when you're privileged, you don't have to think about it.
And has it occurred to you that maybe, just maybe, skin colour and gender do not determine whether someone is privileged or not?
Society says otherwise. How about the fact that women are paid less than men for the same work, and are less likely to be promoted even when equally qualified? Or how about the fact that people of color are targeted more by police officers? I understand that most of your audience will agree with you, but that's because a majority of your audience are white, straight, cisgender males, in many cases who do not see their own privilege. Remember, privilege does not mean problem-free. It means that you're given tools that if someone shared your exact same status except in skin color or gender, you would be at an advantage over them.
Also, men's rights movements that are around now don't even care about men.
I suspect that there may be MRAs in the comments who wish to disagree with you.
While there are some self-identified MRAs that genuinely do care about men's issues, the overwhelming majority are just interested in harassing women online. In fact, the reason many anti-feminists deny the MRA label is because of their well-earned reputation for harassment.
That's what really pisses me off. Being fair, any movement that sets out to help people is a good thing, right? The problem is the men's rights movements do not support male victims of rape.
And no feminist has ever complained about, I don't know, a men's shelter being set up or anything like that.
This is a common misrepresented story used by anti-feminists, Sargon included, in which a protest at a men's shelter was misrepresented as being against the construction of the shelter itself. What actually happened at Ryerson University is a group of feminists were protesting Warren Farrell speaking at a men's rights shelter that had been around for a few years. While I don't think in this case Sargon was deliberately lying to his audience, he was being lazy and not researching it further, which was a point Fawn made earlier in her original video.
Please do your research, because without it, no one has a leg to stand on.
However, a feminist group helped set up a domestic violence support shelter for men in Arkansas.
They do not support male domestic abuse victims. They don't support trans men. Do you know who do support them?
Here it comes.
Feminists!
Yeah, nothing says that we're here to help you quite like you are an oppressor even if you don't know it, and therefore it's okay for me to revel in your misery.
What's that you always say? Grow some thicker skin, I believe it is? Male tears mugs and t-shirts are just meant as a humorous jab at men whining about feminism ruining Star Wars and other such nonsense. This has been twisted into shitting on men's emotions and real issues. However, it's a bit hypocritical for you to make this comment in this video, then a few months later, tweet out to Jess Phillips, "I wouldn't even rape you," defending it as a joke.
Feminism is ruining movies. /series/comics. This argument gets rolled out every time something gets launched with women in it.
That's the most giant straw man I've ever seen in my life.
It's not exactly a straw man. Look through the amount of whining in the anti-feminist community about the all-female Ghostbusters. Hell, you even made a video about it, Sargon. That's just one example. And let's not forget the obsession many anti-feminists have with Anita Sarkeesian.
And you will go on to literally say...
Basically. Why is it totally fine to expect women to enjoy and relate to things that involve mainly men, but as soon as more than one woman comes on the screen, we're taking over?
That is literally not anyone's argument. The argument is, why do you have to replace the cast of Ghostbusters, named characters who have individual histories and backstories, with women? Why do you have to replace Thor with a woman, a named character with a history and backstory? Nobody is complaining that there are women in movies. There have always been women in fucking movies. People are complaining because feminists are pushing to co-opt previously male characters because of their ideology.
Wow, you literally just debunked your previous statement about it being a straw man. It makes it too easy when your statements become self-refuting.
Here's how your argument wouldn't suck. Just injecting female characters into a film or a TV series and not spending the time developing their characters or even writing them not only ruins the movie and the TV show, but also puts a massive hindrance in women in the industry, and it's crap.
You have literally not accurately represented anyone's argument there, and your response is a feminist response. I'm just saying it's pointless.
Has Sargon's train of blustering bullshit run out of steam? It appears so. This response amounts to little more than, "I know you are, but what am I? This is the great anti-feminist intellectual?" Even Thunderfoot crafts better arguments than that.
That means I can hit girls, right? Don't hit anybody. Why do you want to hit people?
Because they're annoying and preachy and have no idea about their own position and think they know everything about mine.
Wow. Did you just happen to miss what Sargon just admitted to? Let's roll the clip again.
Why do you want to hit people?
Because they're annoying and preachy and have no idea about their own position.
Sargon literally admitted he wanted to hit Fawn for having a different opinion than him. I know many of you are going to proclaim, "It's just a joke. Don't get so upset." Even if it was, it's still hypocritical for him to whine about, "I drink male tears coffee mugs," when he said he wanted to assault someone for being a feminist, regardless of whether or not it was just a joke. However, the second half of the statement indicates that it was not a joke and Sargon is actually advocating violence.
Or I could say because men and women are biologically different and men are actually evolutionarily hardwired to get a thrill from punching people.
If this was not a joke, then that indicates that Sargon is no different from Red Pill philosophy, whose idea of equality involves women being savagely beaten for insulting a man, even though none of these men would do that to another man. It's the behavior of schoolyard bullies who never grew up, using bullshit to excuse wanting to hurt someone smaller than them just because they can. If it was a joke, it was a poorly constructed one. And it shows the hypocritical double standards to whine about the mean feminist hurting her fifis while excusing jokes directed at women in equally poor taste. But should you really be surprised? This was a man who said that Elliot Rodger was justified in murdering people because of a fucking feminist system.
And no, it's not all men who act this way. But you know what? It's way too f***ing many.
Which is ironic considering that before your stupid social justice feminine bullshit, it didn't happen on this scale. It's crazy. This is a disease of the modern age. You are responsible for perpetuating it by disenfranchising these poor fucking guys who don't have any options left. When someone takes the option of absolute, insanely last resort, you have to wonder what kind of system is producing them. And I tell you what, Lacey, it is a fucking feminist system that's doing this!
He becomes unhinged in his rant, showing that he clearly identifies with that type of mindset.
Is it like really hard to live, restraining yourself from hitting people all day? You're using this argument as a quick way to put feminists in their place, to make them think that this isn't actually what they want.
You know, it might be what feminists want, but it's certainly not what women want.
Once again, Sargon takes a page straight from the book of sleazeballs like Red Pill Philosophy who actually believe that battered women enjoy being abused. There is no other possible interpretation to be gleaned from this.
The other thing is that you're already hitting us. In the UK alone, 1.4 million women and 700,000 men are suffering from domestic abuse. So we want you to stop hitting us.
I am not even going to take the time. You are not part of some we. You are not part of some we don't want you punching us. We, the men and women who are being abused. You are not one of these people. These people are not a group. They are a demographic. They share nothing in common other than the fact that their spouses beat them. That's it. You aren't a part of it. I'm not a part of it, and you've just demonstrated how this is not a gendered issue.
Sargon deliberately misinterprets her statements as a collectivist argument. These are statistics, something that anti-feminists such as Sargon are keen on using when it benefits them, but when it hurts their argument, they throw them away. It's what's known as cognitive dissonance, wherein they throw away information that doesn't benefit them. His final line also makes no sense. The fact that twice as many women suffer from domestic abuse as men shows that, to an extent, it is a gendered issue. Also, men and women face different challenges when in abusive relationships. For women, it may be harder to get out due to the combination of psychological and physical fear that usually exceeds that of what battered men feel. While for battered men, it's harder to seek help due to the idea in society that a battered man is weak, or somehow less of a man.
Not all men. If we're discussing something about men and it's not something that you have particularly done, then that's great. The reason why your argument sucks is because you have to understand that many men have done this. A majority even.
Okay, I presume you're talking about the case of domestic violence, in which case you're wrong. But even if you're not, you don't know that a majority of men have done whatever it is you think that they are responding to when they say not all men. You don't know. But even if they did, even if the majority of men did this, it would still be wrong to generalize the person who you said didn't do it.
The not all men segment isn't referring exclusively to men who abuse their spouses, but also smaller scale things such as making sexist comments and making excuses for rapists. By staying on the domestic violence tangent, Sargon was able to trick his audience into thinking she was saying a majority of men are abusive. This is why so many academic feminist videos these days are overly technical and dry, so that they can't be as uncharitably interpreted as this one was. Also, Carl, considering that statement you made earlier about being tempted to hit someone you disagree with,
Why do you want to hit people?
Because they're annoying and preachy and have no idea about their own position.
it's kind of hypocritical to go on this tangent.
It's always sucky to have to acknowledge that something that you're a part of has bad bits, but that's just life.
Do you think the same goes for those damn niggers? You fucking racist. Do you think the same maybe goes for the kikes? What about the nips? Just asking because this is the reasoning you are using right now. Hey, just because you're not doing anything wrong, Mr. African American man who isn't causing any trouble, doesn't mean that we're not going to talk about black people as if they're criminals.
Sargon has created a false equivalence here by saying that acknowledging societal structures and trends is somehow the same thing as saying all blacks are criminals. No, it's more akin to saying something about the fact that minorities are more often the targets of police officers. In both cases, an observation is made that does not jump to a conclusion. It allows us to look into the why and to have discussions. Sargon and other anti-feminists do this to paint the feminist argument as being all men are rapists. Also, it's rather interesting that Sargon went straight for the ethnic slurs, as if he was looking for an excuse to use racist language. Considering the content he's made, including a heavy focus in early 2016 on Black Lives Matter, that can be rather telling.
It's always sucky to have to acknowledge that something that you're a part of has bad bits, but that's just life.
So just remember that, black people. I know you didn't get to choose to be part of the race that you are, but I mean, you know, it's just, you're just gonna have to live with it. It's just something that sucks. And no, This does not apply to feminism, even though being a feminist is a choice.
Yes, it does suck that black people face racism in society from people like you, who made a series of videos painting all black activism in the worst light and recycling a clip of Melissa Clark asking, "Can we get some muscle over here?"
So stop driving conversations back to you because it's not about you.
Yeah, Jim Crow. Just like when we were talking about rape culture and you wanted to talk about actual victims of rape, this isn't about you. So why don't you get out of the house now, nigger, toddle back to the cotton fields and do whatever it is you do when the important people aren't around.
This makes no sense whatsoever. Sargon seems to be advocating let's treat the symptoms but not the root cause. Of course, ending Jim Crow was a good thing. But you have to be delusional to think that racism magically went away because there were no separate drinking fountains.
This argument gets used a lot when women do things to protect themselves and are a bit defensive. As we mentioned earlier, rape is up to us to stop.
Fucking what? No, that's actually the opposite of what you said. Let me remind you.
Here's how your argument wouldn't suck. Every single rape prevention tip is geared towards people being in charge of not getting raped, not teaching rapists not to rape. So there's the big problem.
I mean, do you honestly think making the rapists responsible for not raping people is something women are doing to protect themselves? You can't really think that, can you?
It appears she meant rape is up to us as a society to stop. Since she was addressing male viewers, it's highly unlikely she flipped instantly to addressing female viewers. However, Sargon's interpretation of her statement, along with juxtaposition of an earlier statement, is another example of how he's tricking the viewer into seeing things through his lens. The idea is to use tricks to discredit the feminist, while playing enough of the video that the viewer thinks they got the whole picture, where they're riled up enough they go to the video to dislike without watching. Look at the average view time on Fawn's video, 49 seconds. That's about 1/8 of the video, and it was only bumped up by our 7,000 subscribers who watched the video. Immediately after Undoomed and Sargon responded, you can see a spike in our views and a watch time in that spike at or under 30 seconds, which means that these people watched around 7.5% of the video.
And that's when they say, but not all men. Like, you may not be a rapist, but you've got to acknowledge why women do certain things to protect themselves.
It's probably the very same reason these women clutch their handbags tighter when a black person walks by.
Apples and oranges comparison. What about women of color who take preventive steps against being assaulted by men? The difference is a comparison between something that is known to happen and a racist stereotype. We have no evidence whether or not Fawn or her friends either consciously or subconsciously have internalized these stereotypes, but remember, she did acknowledge earlier in the video having white privilege.
You can't take these actions personally because there is a much bigger picture than you.
And young privileged white women are so damn important that them being prejudiced against you because you happen to share a gender with people who have done something wrong is totally fine. Just get used to it, nigger.
Damn, Sargon seems to be taking this really personally. It's as if this brings up memories of being such a nice guy and friend-zoned. Many of these anti-feminists hold the view that women only want to date assholes and are bitter as a result, having projected their own insecurities onto others. They often write off male feminists as white knights, because they themselves were like that at one point before becoming bitter and angry that women saw right through their facade. In their minds, it couldn't possibly be something wrong with them. Despite having a wife and kid, Sargon still seems to be bitter about this, as it echoes the sentiments of his pro-Elliot Rodger rant.
You are responsible for perpetuating it by disenfranchising these poor fucking guys who don't have any options left.
The thing with all these arguments against feminism is that if you wanted to have a proper discussion about it, you would have Googled it and done your research, but you didn't, which makes you an arse.
Okay, we're literally done with this video. You are quite possibly one of the most unpalatable people I've ever met. It's really your phenomenal ignorance and totally illogical arguments combined together with the first world white woman entitlement complex that just makes you just unbearable. I feel sorry for the people in your life that they have to deal with you.
And I feel sorry for the people in your life that they have to deal with you. And I hope they agree with you 100%. Especially after what you said earlier in this video, where you advocated hitting people you disagree with.
Why do you want to hit people?
Because they're annoying and preachy and have no idea about their own position.
The line about doing your research seems to have struck quite the nerve with Sargon, because it's proven time and time again that he just glances through the article and things that he finds often contradict what he says. There's a not-so-funny backstory behind why this video even was responded to by someone not known for doing response videos. It all started with the Atheist Gamer, who I did a video about last time, and briefly mentioned what he did to Fawn in the last time I mentioned him. And while the person I wanted to respond to who responded to Fawn was Feminism is for Nobody, if only because of the Hitler mustache he drew on Fawn and the Nazi swastika he put on her forehead, I felt it was important to expose Sargon's manipulation of his audience by impressing them with his own sophistry. The video began with the Atheist Gamer, before slowly working his way up to Zers, Dr. Randomercam, and a few others before reaching Undoomed, and continued to be passed around until Sargon did his video response in February. When I mentioned how dangerous the Atheist Gamer is in contrast to his buffoonish appearance, this is what I meant. Take a look at the amount of dislikes on this video. Had Tag not responded to it and sent it around to many of his friends, there would at least be some visible blue on the like bar. Until next time, I'm Danny Quartz. Thank you all for watching.